9 out of 10 people will not make it to the end of this video. Not because it is boring, not because it is too long, but because somewhere around the halfway mark, something inside them is going to flinch, and they are going to reach for their phone or open another tab or tell themselves they will finish it later, and they will not finish it later. If you are still here in 20 minutes, it will not be because you had more willpower than the other 9. It will be because something in you already knows that the voice telling you to leave is the same voice that has been quietly running your entire life without your permission. Think about that for a second. 9 out of 10. Not 6, not 7, 9. That is not a statistic about attention spans. That is a statistic about self-sabotage, and it happens at almost exactly the same moment for almost everyone who clicks away, right when the video stops being comfortable and starts asking something of them. It is easy to blame a short attention span. It is much harder and much more useful to ask what it is inside a person that would rather stay comfortable and stuck than sit with 20 more minutes of discomfort that might actually change something. You have a program running in your mind right now. You did not write it. You did not choose it. It was installed by teachers who meant well, by parents who were tired, by failures that felt bigger than they were, by 100 small moments where someone told you what you could not do, and you believed them a little more than you should have. That program has a name. It is called the ceiling. And most people never even know it is there because it does not feel like a wall. It feels like common sense. It feels like being realistic. It feels like you. Maybe you're watching this at 11 at night because the house is finally quiet and this is the only hour that belongs to you. Maybe you have a notebook somewhere half filled with plans you started and did not finish because life kept happening in between. Perhaps right now you are doing everything you are supposed to be doing. You wake up. You work hard. You show up for people, and still, somehow, the version of your life you can see clearly in your head at night is not the one you are living in the morning. Maybe you have started to wonder if that gap is simply what adulthood is. If dreams are just something you are supposed to grow out of, the way you grew out of believing in things you could not prove. Maybe the hardest part is not even the stalling itself. It is how convincing the excuses have become over the years, how reasonable they sound when you say them out loud, how they have been sanded down and polished by repetition until they no longer feel like excuses at all. They feel like facts about who you are. Perhaps you have told yourself you're not disciplined enough, not smart enough, not lucky enough, not born into the right family, not given the right break. You have collected your reasons carefully, the way some people collect coins, and you take them out sometimes and turn them over in your hand, because reasons are easier to hold than responsibility. Maybe you have watched other people rise, people who do not seem to work harder than you, and you have felt something twist in your chest that you were too proud to call jealousy, so you called it something softer instead. Maybe there is a version of you that shows up in daydreams, usually right before sleep or right after a small disappointment, a version that is calmer, further along, already living inside the thing you keep postponing. You do not conjure that version on purpose. It simply arrives, uninvited, the way a familiar song arrives when you are not thinking about anything at all. And then just as quickly, a second voice arrives right behind it, the practical one, the tired one, reminding you of your bills, your responsibilities, the way things actually are. And that second voice always seems to win, not because it is smarter, but because it has had more practice speaking. None of that is a character flaw. It is a program installed slowly, running quietly, and never once chosen by the person it now controls. And tonight, we are going to open it up and look at what is actually written inside it. Because a man who spent 20 years interviewing the most successful people of his era found something almost every one of them had in common, and it had nothing to do with luck, or bloodline, or timing. His name was Napoleon Hill, and the thread he pulled on patiently across 2 decades of interviews with people most of us only ever meet in history books would eventually be called Think and Grow Rich, though the title is almost a trick, because the book was never really about money. It was about the mechanism underneath money, the mechanism underneath everything a human being has ever built on purpose. The first thing Hill discovered, sitting across from men who had built empires out of nothing, was that every single one of them could describe their goal in a single sharp sentence. Not a vague wish, not a mood. A precise target, with an edge to it, the kind of thing you could almost touch. He called this definiteness of purpose, and it sounds simple until you realize how rare it actually is. Ask yourself honestly, right now, before you keep listening, if someone stopped you on the street tomorrow and asked exactly what you were building toward, and exactly by when, could you answer in one clean sentence, or would you hear yourself hedging, softening, reaching for words like eventually and someday, the two quietest thieves in the entire English language? Most people do not fail because they aim too high. They fail because they never aim at all. They drift with a general wish to do well, to be happy, to make something of themselves, and a general wish is invisible to the part of your mind that actually gets things done, because that part of your mind cannot act on fog. It can only act on a target. Andrew Carnegie did not simply want to be rich. As a boy working in a cotton mill for a few cents a day, he had already fixed his mind on a specific, almost audacious idea that he would one day control the production of steel in America, and he held that picture with such stubborn clarity that every decision afterward, every job change, every risk, bent toward it like iron filings toward a magnet. People assumed his success was assembled after the fact, one lucky break stacked on another. It was not. The picture came first. The empire was just the shadow it cast. Here is the action step, and I want you to actually do this, not just nod along and keep scrolling through your own mind. Tonight, before you sleep, write one sentence. Not a paragraph, not a vision board, one sentence stating exactly what you want and by when you want it. Not I want to be successful, something with edges. I will launch my business by March. I will lose 40 pounds by summer. I will finish the manuscript by winter. The sentence does not have to be comfortable. It has to be definite. Vague wishes evaporate by morning. Definite purpose survives contact with a Tuesday. Write it somewhere you cannot avoid seeing it, on the mirror, on the lock screen of the phone that has been stealing your evenings, somewhere your eyes will land before your excuses have had time to wake up and get organized. Now here is where most people quietly believe something false. So let me bust it before it costs you anything else. Most people believe that confidence comes first, that you need to feel ready before you commit to a goal, that faith is a feeling you either have or do not have, like a mood that shows up uninvited. Hill proved the opposite, and it is the part of his work that gets skipped the most because it sounds too strange to trust. He found that faith is not a feeling at all. It is a byproduct of repetition. It is manufactured deliberately through what he called autosuggestion, the practice of feeding your own subconscious mind a chosen thought on purpose over and over until it stops sounding like a wish and starts sounding like a fact. Ask yourself something honestly. How many times today have you already rehearsed a version of the future going wrong, in vivid, specific detail, without ever once catching yourself doing it? Most people run that rehearsal dozens of times a day without noticing, because it does not announce itself as a decision. It arrives disguised as caution, as being prepared, as simply being realistic about the odds. Think about how you learned to be afraid of something. Nobody sat you down and reasoned you into that fear with a spreadsheet. It was repeated. A moment happened once, and your mind replayed it quietly in the background until the fear became automatic, until you did not even have to think about it anymore. It just fired on its own. That is autosuggestion working against you without your permission. The same way a program runs in the background of a computer you never opened yourself. Hill's insight was almost unfairly simple. If repetition can install a fear you never chose, repetition can install a belief you do choose. The mechanism does not care what you feed it. It only knows how to repeat. Thomas Edison sat with failure over 1,000 times while trying to perfect a working light bulb, and when a reporter, expecting shame, asked him how it felt to fail so many times, Edison corrected him without hesitation. He had not failed. He had simply found over 1,000 separate occasions methods that did not work, and each one moved him closer to the one that would. That is not a clever quote for a poster. That is a man whose internal narration had been so deliberately shaped that failure literally could not register in his mind the way it registers in most of ours. His subconscious had been fed a different sentence on repeat for years, and by the time the results came in, the sentence was simply true for him. So here is your action step, and it costs nothing but 90 seconds a day. Choose one sentence, present tense as if it is already happening. not "I will be confident." I am becoming the kind of person who follows through. Say it out loud, morning and night, for 30 days, even when it feels like a lie, especially when it feels like a lie. That discomfort is not evidence that it is false. It is evidence that the old program is still running underneath the new one, and the two are finally in conflict. That conflict is not failure. That conflict is progress you can feel. There is a callback I want to plant here because you are going to need it later tonight, and I want it to already feel familiar when it returns. The mind does not know the difference between a vividly imagined future and a lived memory. It only knows repetition. Hold on to that. We will come back to it. Now we move to something Hill considered almost sacred because he watched it separate the merely talented from the genuinely transformative, and it is the principle most people quietly avoid because it asks something uncomfortable of them. He called it decision, and he meant something far more precise than choosing a flavor of ice cream. He meant the act of closing a door on purpose, permanently, so that retreat is no longer an option your mind is allowed to consider. Hill studied the biographies of successful people and found something almost eerie. The ones who built something lasting made major decisions quickly and rarely reversed them, while the ones who drifted through mediocrity made decisions slowly, if at all, and reversed them constantly the moment discomfort arrived. It is not that successful people had better information. Often they had less. What they had was the willingness to decide with the information available and then defend that decision against their own doubt, instead of treating doubt as new information every single time it showed up. Henry Ford decided, long before he had the resources to justify it, that he would build an automobile affordable enough for the ordinary worker who built it, and he held that decision through years of engineers telling him it could not be done at the price point he demanded. He was not smarter than every engineer who told him no. He had simply removed reversal from the table as an option, and a mind with no exit tends to find a way through the wall instead of quietly circling back to the door. Here is your uncomfortable mythbuster for this principle, and I want you to actually sit with it instead of letting it slide past. Most people believe that keeping their options open is a form of wisdom, a kind of safety. Hill's research suggests almost the opposite. Keeping every option open is often exhaustion wearing the costume of strategy, and it quietly drains the same energy a real decision would have converted into momentum. A door left open is a door your mind has to guard every day, whether you notice the guarding or not. Your action step tonight is small, and it will feel disproportionately large. Pick one thing you have been circling for months without deciding, and decide it tonight before you sleep. Not research it further, not think about it more. Decide and tell one other person you have decided, because a decision spoken out loud to someone who will ask about it later becomes very expensive to quietly abandon. Notice how the doubt shows up right after you decide, almost on schedule, right on time, like it was waiting quietly for the door to close so it could start knocking. That is not a sign you decided wrongly. Doubt arriving on time is not evidence against a decision. It is simply the old program noticing it has lost a little territory and trying, out of habit, to take it back. The people who build something lasting are not the ones who stop feeling doubt. They are the ones who stop mistaking the feeling of doubt for a command they were required to obey. There is one more piece Hill insisted on, and without it, everything we have covered so far can quietly collapse into good intentions. He called it organized planning, and it is the least glamorous of his principles, which is probably why it gets skipped the most in every summary you have ever half-read online. A definite purpose without a plan is just a wish with better posture. Faith without a plan is a feeling with nowhere to land. Hill found that every person he studied who built something lasting had at some point sat down and broken their enormous goal into a sequence of smaller, almost boring steps, and then treated that sequence as sacred, revising it constantly, but never abandoning the discipline of having one at all. Andrew Carnegie again offers the clearest picture of this, because the steel empire he built was never the product of one man's genius working alone in a room. Carnegie was famous for surrounding himself with specialists who knew things he did not, engineers, chemists, salesmen, and he organized their combined knowledge around his single definite purpose with the precision of a conductor arranging an orchestra. He once said, in essence, that he would rather have the ability to deal with people than any other ability under the sun, and the plan he built was less about steel and more about people, positioned deliberately, each one solving a piece of the puzzle he could not solve alone. This coordinated effort between two or more minds working toward a single purpose was so central to Hill's findings that he gave it its own name, the mastermind, and he considered it one of the most underused sources of power available to an ordinary person, mainly because most people try to build everything alone out of pride, mistaking isolation for independence. Ask yourself who in your life could become part of that and whether pride has been quietly keeping you from asking them. Here is the myth worth dismantling before we move on. Most people believe planning is the boring part that happens after the exciting part, after the dream, after the decision, a kind of administrative chore you get to once the real magic has already happened. Hill's research suggests the plan is not separate from the magic. The plan is where the dream becomes physical enough to survive contact with a Tuesday morning, the same Tuesday morning that quietly kills most vague wishes before lunch. And here is the part almost nobody tells you because it sounds unglamorous next to everything we have already covered tonight. Imagination is the workshop where the plan gets built before it ever touches the real world, and Hill considered it every bit as trainable as faith or persistence, not some rare gift handed only to poets and inventors. You do not need to be naturally imaginative to use this. You simply need to sit on purpose for 10 quiet minutes and let yourself see the plan working step by step before you ever attempt the first one, because a plan rehearsed vividly in the mind tends to meet far less resistance when it finally meets the world. Your action step here is simple, and I want you to actually write it down instead of just deciding to remember it. Take the one sentence you wrote earlier tonight, your definite purpose, and break it into exactly 5 steps, nothing more, nothing less, in the order you would actually need to do them. Do not aim for a perfect plan. Aim for a plan specific enough to act on tomorrow morning before your mind has time to talk you out of it. And if there is one person in your life who knows something you do not, someone who has already walked part of the road you are about to walk, tell them what you are building. 2 minds organized around one purpose will almost always outrun one mind working alone in silence. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. I want you to notice that sentence is not decoration. It is the entire architecture we have been walking through tonight, one principle at a time, and it is about to become the bridge between the last 2 ideas and everything that comes after them, because conceiving and believing are not enough on their own, and Hill knew this better than almost anyone because he watched brilliant, driven people quit at the exact moment they were closest to breaking through, simply because nobody had warned them that the final stretch is always the darkest one. He called the missing ingredient persistence, and he was careful to separate it from mere stubbornness. Persistence, in Hill's framework, is not refusing to adjust your method. It is refusing to abandon your purpose while you adjust everything else around it as many times as it takes. John D. Rockefeller built his early oil business through market collapses that wiped out competitors who had started with more capital and better connections than he had. What separated him was not that he never faced ruin. He faced it more than once, watching competitors with deeper pockets and longer histories fold around him in downturns that should have ended his ambitions before they properly began. What separated him was that ruin, for him, was information about the method, never a verdict on the purpose. He would rebuild the approach, change suppliers, renegotiate terms, restructure entire operations if the numbers demanded it, and keep the target exactly where it had always been, immovable, while everything underneath it stayed flexible enough to survive. Most of his competitors did the reverse. They kept the same method and abandoned the target the moment it stopped feeling comfortable, which is precisely backward, and precisely why most attempts at anything meaningful die quietly around the same point every time. Here is the myth worth burning down before we move any further. Most people believe persistence is a personality trait, something you either have from birth or you do not, like eye color. Hill found the opposite to be true in case after case. Persistence is a skill, built the same way a muscle is built, through repeated small acts of continuing specifically at the moment continuing feels unreasonable. Nobody is persistent in general. People are persistent about one specific thing they have decided matters more than their own discomfort, and that is a decision available to you tonight, not a trait you were denied at birth. Your action step is this. Identify the exact moment in your recent past where you quietly gave up on something, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly stopped showing up for it. Write down what you told yourself in that moment, because that sentence is the actual program, and now that you can see it, you get to decide whether to feed it again tomorrow. I want to be honest with you for a moment, because everything up to this point has been teaching, and teaching is easy to nod along to and then forget by breakfast. I have watched people I care about, absorb every one of these ideas perfectly, recite them back with total clarity, and still wake up the next morning and do exactly what they did the morning before. I used to think that meant the ideas were wrong. They are not wrong. What I understand now is that information was never the missing piece for any of us. You already know somewhere in you exactly what you should be doing differently. You have known for a while. The gap has never been knowledge. The gap has been the 20 minutes after you learned something. The 20 minutes where the old program tries to reassert itself before the new one has had a chance to take root, because that is exactly where most people are sitting right now, at this very sentence, deciding whether tonight is different or whether it is going to be one more video that felt good and changed nothing. There was a stretch of my own life, longer than I am proud of, where I could recite every principle in this video from memory and still not apply a single one of them to anything that mattered, because reciting an idea and being changed by it are two entirely different acts, and only one of them requires courage. I knew about definite purpose and still drifted for years on a vague wish to eventually figure things out. I knew about autosuggestion and still spent my nights rehearsing every way the future might disappoint me in vivid, faithful detail, feeding the exact program I would later spend so much energy trying to undo. What finally moved me was not learning something new. It was running out of tomorrows I was willing to hand over to the old voice for free. Remember what I told you to hold on to earlier. The mind does not know the difference between a vividly imagined future and a lived memory. It only knows repetition. That is not a comforting bedtime thought. That is a tool, plain and mechanical. And right now, tonight, you get to decide exactly what you feed it. Every night you spend replaying your doubts in vivid detail, you are doing autosuggestion perfectly, just aimed at the wrong target. The same mechanism that could build the life you actually want has been quietly building the life you are afraid of instead, and it has been doing it faithfully, without judgment, exactly as instructed, because that is all it ever does. It follows instructions. It has simply been taking them from the wrong voice. 9 out of 10 people who started this video are already gone. If you made it here, some part of you already suspected that tonight might be different, and that suspicion is not a coincidence. It is the first flicker of a decision making itself known before your conscious mind has caught up to it. You do not need a new personality by tomorrow morning. You do not need to become someone unrecognizable. You need one sentence spoken honestly and one small door closed behind you before you sleep tonight. I am not going to pretend that one video rewrites 20 years of programming. It does not, and anyone who tells you a single video will fix your entire life is selling you something they know is not true. What one video can do, if you let it, is mark the exact hour you stopped feeding the old voice for free and started feeding the new one on purpose, deliberately, the same way Edison fed his a different sentence 1,000 separate times until the sentence became true. Tonight does not have to be the night everything changes. It only has to be the night you decided it would start changing, which, if you have been paying attention for the last 20 minutes, is really the only kind of night that ever mattered to any of the people we have talked about tonight. Carnegie did not start with steel mills. He started with one boy in a cotton mill deciding quietly that his circumstances were not going to be the final word on his life. Ford did not start with an assembly line. He started with a stubborn refusal to accept that the price point he wanted was impossible. Rockefeller did not start immune to ruin. He started willing to rebuild the method as many times as it took, as long as the purpose stayed exactly where he had planted it. You are allowed to start exactly where you are, with exactly what you have tonight, at whatever hour this finds you. Nobody is coming to hand you permission. Nobody was ever going to. The permission was always sitting quietly inside the same mind that has been running someone else's program for years, waiting for you to notice it was yours to give the entire time. Here is the line I want you to carry out of this video. The one thing to remember if you remember nothing else. You were never behind. You were simply running someone else's program, and tonight you found the switch. In the next 24 hours, before you allow yourself to scroll, before you let the day swallow you whole the way it usually does, do the one thing every principal tonight has quietly been pointing toward. Write the single sentence that defines exactly what you want and by when. Say it out loud like it is already true. Decide one thing you have been avoiding and close the door behind it so there is no quiet retreat waiting for you tomorrow. That is not a suggestion for someday. That is tonight's instruction, and you already know it, because you have known it, quietly, for longer than you have been willing to admit out loud to anyone, including yourself. If you are still here, if you made it all the way to this sentence while 9 out of 10 people gave up somewhere in the middle, I want you to do one more thing before you go. Put one word in the comments below, just one, the word that represents what you are committing to tonight, not a paragraph, not an explanation. One word, because a decision spoken plainly to strangers who will see it tomorrow morning is a door that has just become very hard to quietly walk back through. You conceived it tonight. You believed it enough to stay this long. Now go achieve it, quietly, deliberately, one honest step at a time, starting with the next 24 hours, because that is the only stretch of time you were ever actually promised, and it is more than enough to begin.